25 kilometers. That was the distance. The precise measure of a dream's failure. For the Polish PT-91 Twardy main battle tank, 25 kilometers was the journey from a hopeful start to a dead metallic stop. On the testing grounds, as the machine shuddered into silence, mechanics would climb from its hull, clutch their heads in frustration, and disappear into the greasy confines of the engine compartment. Meanwhile, its rival, the German Leopard 2A4, simply kept going. 174 kilometers without a single fault, 7 times the distance, 7 times the reliability. These figures, born from comparative trials, would echo across the globe, becoming a damning epitaph for Poland's ambitious foray into modern tank design. How could a nation with such a proud military heritage create a machine that seemed to break down more often than it drove? The story of the Twardy begins in the crucible of a collapsing world. The year was 1989, and Europe was turning itself inside out. The Berlin Wall had fallen, the Warsaw Pact was fracturing, and the nations of the Eastern Bloc were, one by one, turning their gaze westward. Poland found itself at a historic and terrifying crossroads. To the west, a reunifying Germany, a former adversary now possessing Western Europe's most formidable army. To the east, the Soviet Union, its colossal parent state, was convulsing in the throes of its own internal upheaval. Warsaw needed a strong, independent army, and it needed one immediately. The problem lay in its inheritance. The Polish armed forces were a textbook Warsaw Pact military. Its armored fist consisted almost exclusively of Soviet machines, aging T-55s, more contemporary T-72s in various states of repair, and a number of T-72 M1s produced under license at the great factory in Gliwice. This hardware was perfectly adequate for a war fought under Soviet command, but it was utterly unsuited for an independent Poland dreaming of joining NATO. The government faced an impossible choice. The first option was to purchase modern Western tanks, but the coffers of the young democracy were empty. The price tags on Leopards and Abrams were counted in millions of dollars per unit. The second option, designing a tank from scratch, would require decades and billions of zloty that simply did not exist. And so, a third path emerged, a path that seemed, at the time, to be the most sensible compromise. To take what they already had and modernize it. The choice fell upon the T-72 M1. The Poles knew this tank intimately. They built it themselves at the Bumar-Lebendy plant. The equipment was there, the specialists were trained, and the archives held every last technical document. The idea seemed brilliant. Take the proven Soviet platform and infuse it with modern electronics, a new power plant, and advanced armor. It was a vision of a world-class tank, forged in the fires of necessity, a symbol of a nation determined to stand on its own. The year was 1991. In Warsaw, the old world had crumbled, and a new one was struggling to be born. With newfound sovereignty came the urgent question of national defense, and at its heart lay a formidable yet deeply flawed Soviet legacy: the T-72 main battle tank. The Polish High Command believed a solution was within reach, and with what they considered a modest budget, the work began. Engineers at the Military Institute of Armament Technology in Warsaw took up the challenge with a patriotic fervor. This was more than a technical upgrade. It was a declaration of independence. They pored over every available schematic of Soviet armor, but their most vital intelligence came from a world away, from the scorched sands of the Persian Gulf. The war had been a brutal proving ground, and for the T-72, it had been a catastrophe. The lessons were stark and undeniable. A list of essential improvements was drawn up, targeting the tank's three critical vulnerabilities: its primitive fire control system, its dangerously inadequate protection against modern anti-tank weapons, and its obsolete, underpowered engine. All of this had to be rectified. By the end of 1992, the first prototype was complete. They named it the PT-91. PT for Polski tank, the number signifying the year the project was launched. It was also given a nickname, a statement of intent: Twardy. In Polish, it means hard or tough. A name chosen to directly address the machine's greatest weakness, its fragility, and to promise a new era of survivability. Under a blanket of the strictest secrecy, the prototype was rolled onto the proving grounds near Poznan. The tests began. In Warsaw, Polish generals rubbed their hands in anticipation, imagining an army soon equipped with a modern tank of their own design. A machine that would be no mere copy, but a peer to its Western counterparts. They could not yet know what a bitter disappointment awaited them just over the horizon. The engineers at the Bumar-Labendi plant understood a simple cosmetic fix would be useless. The T-72 was a product of a specific, brutal doctrine. It was designed for the colossal, human wave-style armored assaults of the Soviet Army, where the loss of individual machines was an acceptable cost, compensated for by overwhelming numbers. Poland, however, could not afford such a grim calculus. For the Polish army, every single tank had to endure on the battlefield for as long as humanly possible. The designers began with the most obvious flaw: the armor. The Soviet Contact 1 explosive reactive armor on the T-72 looked impressive, but it concealed a fatal design oversight. The explosive-filled containers were bolted to the hull with gaps of 10 to 15 millimeters between them. These slits seemed insignificant, a minor detail. But the focused, superheated jet from a modern anti-tank missile could slip precisely into such a gap, bypassing the reactive element entirely and burning through the primary armor beneath. The Polish specialists developed their own system, a brilliant and elegant solution named Arawa. Here, the containers were arranged with almost no space between. The containers covered an area of 9 square meters. 108 of them were placed on the turret, 118 on the hull, and another 84 were fixed to the anti-cumulative side screens. In a crucial departure from the Soviet original, the Poles replaced the flimsy rubber side skirts with solid steel, adding another layer of defense against infantry rocket-propelled grenades. The Arawa system itself came in 2 variants. The first version contained a single layer of explosive, designed to defeat standard-shaped charges. The second, more ambitious version featured 2 layers of explosive material. In theory, it was a revolution in protection. On paper, it was a masterpiece of defensive engineering. In practice, the path from a brilliant concept to a battle-worthy reality is often paved with unforeseen obstacles and the harsh arithmetic of economics. The dream of a truly independent armored fist was powerful, but the ghosts of the old machine and the limitations of the new era would prove far more stubborn than anyone had imagined. The battlefield was changing. A new generation of threats had emerged from the arsenals of the West. Chief among them, the tandem-charge cumulative warhead, a weapon engineered to defeat the very reactive armor that was supposed to make a tank invincible. For Poland's armored forces, this posed an existential question. Their answer was a defiant layer of indigenous protection: the Arawa reactive armor. Polish engineers, with no small measure of national pride, declared that their creation surpassed its Soviet counterparts in sheer defensive efficiency. But armor, they knew, was only half the solution. It was a brutal, final line of defense. A far more elegant victory is to avoid being struck at all. To protect the machine, one must first blind the enemy's aim. To this end, engineers integrated a sophisticated laser warning system known as OBRA. 4 discrete sensor heads were positioned around the turret, forming an invisible 360-degree perimeter. Their sole purpose was to perpetually scan the battlespace, hunting for the telltale glint of a hostile laser designator. Modern anti-tank guided missiles relied on these precise beams to paint their targets, meaning the OBRA system could detect a looming threat mere seconds before a missile was even launched. The system operated in 2 distinct modes. In its automatic state, it was a phantom guardian. Upon detecting a laser lock, OBRA would instantly calculate the threat's direction and, without human intervention, fire a volley of smoke grenades from its 12 launchers, 6 mounted on each side of the turret. A dense, impenetrable smoke screen would erupt, shrouding the tank from sight and severing the missile's guidance link. Should the automatic systems fail for any reason, the commander could assume manual control, a final human decision in a chain of high-speed electronics. It was a truly modern defense suite, one that placed the Polish machine on par with the finest Western tanks in its resilience against guided weaponry. Yet every solution breeds a new problem. This shield of advanced armor and electronic countermeasures came at a cost. Weight. The tank's mass had swelled to a formidable 45 tons. The original Soviet V-46 engine, producing 780 horsepower, was sufficient for the basic T-72, but it simply could not cope with this new burden. The once nimble Predator was becoming a lumbering beast, its sluggishness a fatal liability on a fluid battlefield. The order for a new heart went to the PZL Wola factory in Warsaw. Their engineers took the proven Soviet V-46 as a foundation and began a deep and thorough modernization, focusing on the fuel and air intake systems. The result was the S-12U, a 12-cylinder diesel powerhouse that generated 850 horsepower. This crucial increase of 70 horsepower restored the tank's agility, allowing it to reach 60 kilometers per hour on roads and granting it a combat range of up to 650 kilometers on a single fueling. With its body protected and its legs strengthened, attention turned to its claws and its mind. The Drawa fire control system became the crowning achievement of the program. It integrated a gunner's day sight, a passive night vision channel, a laser rangefinder, and a sophisticated ballistic computer. This digital brain was the true killer. It absorbed a constant stream of data, target velocity, ambient weather conditions, even the temperature and type of the shell loaded in the breech, and performed instantaneous calculations to produce a perfect firing solution. The commander, meanwhile, was given the SDK-1 diagnostic complex, a dedicated monitor displaying the real-time status of every critical system. But one final piece of the puzzle remained. To hit a target while thundering across broken terrain requires an almost supernatural stability. The stock Soviet 2E-28M2 plane stabilizer, however, no longer provided the requisite precision. The gun would drift, the aim would wander, and a first-round kill became a matter of luck rather than science. The Poles knew this was unacceptable. A new solution had to be found, for in the unforgiving calculus of armored warfare, the difference between a near miss and a direct hit is the difference between life and death. The evolution of the machine was not yet complete. To forge a truly modern main battle tank, one capable of meeting the demands of a new era, Polish engineers looked beyond their own borders. They turned to their Slovak colleagues, acquiring a far more advanced gun stabilization system. At last, the crew could deliver accurate fire while on the move, a non-negotiable requirement for any contemporary armored vehicle. By 1994, all trials were complete. The military leadership of Poland, confident in their new creation, gave the order to begin serial production. The first PT-91 Twardy tanks, its name meaning hard or resilient, were scheduled to enter service the very next year. The spring of 1995 was a moment of profound triumph for the Polish military-industrial complex. In a grand ceremony, the first production vehicles were solemnly handed over to the 11th Armored Cavalry Division, named for the great King Jan III Sobieski, garrisoned in Żagań in the country's west. Generals delivered impassioned speeches about a new epoch in the history of the Polish army. Journalists' cameras flashed relentlessly, and the tank crews, beaming with pride, posed before their formidable new machines. No one present could have possibly guessed how quickly this euphoria would curdle into bitter disappointment. Production at the Bumar-Lebendi plant surged to full capacity. Every month, several new tanks rolled off the line, dispatched immediately to military units across the nation. The plan was ambitious: to build several hundred machines, enough to completely rearm the tank divisions of the Polish army. In parallel, the old T-72 M1s continued their service. About 120 remained active, with nearly 500 more held in storage as a strategic reserve. The first alarms, however, sounded just a few months into the Twardy's operational life. Crews began reporting persistent problems with the engine. The modernized S-12U, so lauded by its designers, proved to be a temperamental and finicky beast, unforgiving of even the slightest impurity in its fuel. During exercises, the machines would regularly stall at the most inopportune moments, sabotaging the completion of critical combat tasks. Mechanics, utterly exhausted, struggled just to keep the fleet in working order. The tank's electrical systems presented just as many unwelcome surprises. The sophisticated electronics packed into the PT-91 were ill-suited to the harsh realities of a 39-ton vehicle, reacting poorly to constant vibration and extreme temperature shifts. The gun sights would fail, the ballistic computer would spit out errors, and the laser warning system would sometimes trigger false alarms, compelling the crew to needlessly deploy their entire stock of smoke grenades. Unit commanders filed report after report, but in the halls of high command, there was a preference to simply not see the problem. The armament, too, was a source of constant headaches. The autoloader, a system inherited from the T-72 and supposedly perfected by Polish engineers, had a terrifying tendency to jam. In a real combat scenario, such a failure would mean certain death for the crew, as their tank was instantly transformed into a static, defenseless target, unable to return fire. The advanced GRWA fire control system demanded constant, delicate calibration, a fine-tuning that required a level of expertise far beyond the qualifications of most Army technicians. The promise of a new era, forged in steel and national pride, was beginning to rust from the inside out. The machine built to be hard was revealing a fragility that no one had ever anticipated. A stark lesson in the vast and unforgiving gulf that often separates the blueprint from the battlefield. Within the steel hide of Poland's new main battle tank, the PT-91 Twardy, a conflict was brewing. It wasn't a battle fought on any field, but one waged in the circuitry and wiring that snaked through its interior. The machine was a strange, almost schizophrenic blend of Soviet legacy and Polish ambition. At the heart of the problem were its communications, the R-173 radio station and its companion receiver, a direct inheritance from the original Soviet T-72. Their compatibility with the tank's newer, Polish-designed electronics was, to put it mildly, problematic. For the crews sealed inside, the reality was one of constant frustration. During complex maneuvers, the ether would fill not with clear commands, but with a maddening hiss of static. Voices would vanish mid-sentence, the vital link between commander and platoon dissolving into nothing. Coordinating an armored assault became a dangerous guessing game, a ballet of multi-ton machines moving half-blind. The complaints grew louder, echoing from the training grounds back to the Ministry of Defense. Initially, the leadership at the Bumar-Labindi factory dismissed the issues as a simple case of human error. The tankers, they argued, were simply unaccustomed to such sophisticated technology. The mechanics, they implied, lacked the qualifications to properly service this modern marvel. And so, a wave of corrective measures was deployed. Additional instructors were dispatched to the armored brigades. Entire crews were pulled from their posts for retraining. Thick, newly printed operating manuals were distributed throughout the ranks. The situation did improve, but only marginally. The ghost in the machine remained. By 1998, the truth could no longer be ignored. This was not a failure of men, but of the machine itself. The problem was systemic. The statistics on equipment failure were climbing with an unforgiving, relentless trajectory. The cost of repairs and constant maintenance began to devour an ever larger portion of the military budget. Some of the brand new tanks, Poland's pride, were spending more time languishing in repair workshops than they were on active duty. Generals began to whisper in quiet corridors, and Despite the growing crisis, production continued, albeit at a much slower pace. By the year 2002, the factory had delivered 233 PT-91 Twardy tanks. It was then that the assembly line was officially and quietly shut down. Instead of the several hundred machines once envisioned as the backbone of the army, Poland was left with a modest fleet, barely enough to fully equip a few brigades. The official reason given was the successful completion of the rearmament program. But darker rumors circulated that the military had simply grown tired of wrestling with an unreliable and temperamental beast. It was at this precise moment of national uncertainty that an unexpected player entered the scene. Germany, eager to strengthen its ties with its Eastern European neighbors, made Poland an offer that was almost impossible to refuse. Berlin was prepared to transfer a significant number of Leopard 2A4 tanks from the Bundeswehr's own surplus stockpiles under exceptionally favorable terms. These were machines freed up by the downsizing of the German army, powerful predators in need of a new home. In that same year, 2002, the German tanks arrived. As the Leopards were unloaded from railway platforms at the base in Świętoszów, Polish tankers could only stare. They saw the angular, imposing silhouettes, the long barrels of the potent 120mm guns, and the undeniable reputation of Europe's finest tank. The Germans were giving them away for what amounted to a symbolic price, calculating their payment not in currency, but in political capital, and the forging of an alliance with a future NATO partner. The Polish High Command found itself in a profoundly delicate position. To refuse the Free Leopards would have been strategic folly, yet to accept them was to implicitly condemn the entire PT-91 program, a project into which immense national pride and vast sums of money had already been poured. It was a choice between a homegrown dream and a foreign-made reality, a dilemma born from the harsh intersection of ambition and pragmatism. A nation's identity, forged in steel, was now being weighed against the cold, hard logic of a changing world. On the scarred earth of a military proving ground, a question of national pride and battlefield reality was about to be settled. The generals had decreed it, a truly honest comparison, a trial by ordeal where two formidable machines would face the same unforgiving conditions. The steel itself, they argued, would reveal its own worth. For weeks, the polygon had been groomed for this purpose, transformed into a crucible designed by specialists. They had drafted a comprehensive program of tests, a gauntlet intended to push metal and mechanics to their absolute limits. Grueling marches over vast distances, the violent ballet of firing upon moving targets, the brutal negotiation of man-made obstacles, and a deep, invasive diagnostic of every single onboard system. The terms were non-negotiable. Both tanks would traverse an identical route, bearing identical loads. To eliminate the unpredictable variable of human skill, the crews were hand-picked from the most experienced tankers in the service. The stage was set for a definitive verdict. In the early days, a deceptive parity seemed to hold. The Polish PT-91 Twardy moved with confidence along the track, demonstrating respectable maneuverability and cross-country performance. On a parallel course, the German Leopard 2A4 kept pace. To the casual observer, they were equals, two steel behemoths carving twin tracks in the dust, both appearing eminently capable. But on the third dawn, the illusion shattered. The Polish tank, without warning, shuddered to a halt in the middle of an open field. Its engine had fallen silent. For nearly a full 24 hours, mechanics swarmed the inert machine, wrestling with its stubborn heart before its roar could once again be coaxed to life. From that moment, the situation only deteriorated. The PT-91 began to fail again and again, as if conspiring in its own humiliation, determined to disgrace its creators. One moment, the intricate web of its electronics would go dark. The next, the transmission would grind in protest. The fire control system, its digital eye, would blink with incomprehensible errors. Each breakdown was a fresh wound in the trial's schedule, signifying an immediate stop, a desperate call to the repair brigade, and long, soul-crushing hours of waiting while specialists delved into the vehicle's tormented guts. And all the while, its German counterpart simply continued. Methodically, almost indifferently, the Leopard devoured the kilometers, one after another, without a single significant falter. When the tests finally concluded, the Commission reviewed the data. The results were not just disappointing, they were staggering. The Polish tank's average operational distance before a critical failure was a paltry 25 kilometers. This meant the machine was virtually guaranteed to break down before it could even cross a 30-kilometer stretch of rugged terrain. By stark comparison, the Leopard 2A4 posted a mean time between failures of 174 kilometers, a difference of nearly 7 times, a chasm so wide it left no room for interpretation. The statistics on repair were even more damning. To remedy a fault on the PT-91 took, on average, 3.2 days. 3 days of paralysis after every breakdown. In a combat scenario, this would spell the complete and utter loss of a unit's fighting capability. The Leopard, however, required just 1.3 days to be returned to service, meaning it was repaired almost 3 times faster. The German machine not only broke down less often, it returned to the fight far more quickly. The Commission compiled a detailed report, an autopsy of the failures. Most of the PT-91's afflictions were traced to 4 core areas: the engine, the electrical equipment, the armament, and the communications suites. In essence, every single system that Polish engineers had modernized or grafted onto the base T-72 chassis had performed unsatisfactorily. And here lay the cruelest irony of all. The original Soviet machine, the very platform they had sought to improve, was known to be significantly more reliable than its supposedly superior descendant. The final report was immediately classified, buried under layers of official secrecy. But truth in an army has a way of seeping out. Rumors of the disaster. With this capricious technology, it was no secret. It was the hard, cold reality of engineering ambition colliding with the unforgiving laws of mechanics. A silent testament that progress is not always an advancement, and that sometimes, in the noble quest to build something better, one can inadvertently engineer a perfect failure. The men in the barracks simply nodded grimly. They needed no official documents, no stamped and sealed reports to tell them the true worth of their machines. In the hushed conversations and gallows humor of the tank crews, the PT-91 had already acquired a litany of unflattering nicknames. An assignment to a unit equipped with the Twardy, the hard one, was no longer a point of pride. It had become a form of punishment. From the Bumar Labindi factory, the official justifications began to flow. Company representatives pointed to the obvious. The Leopard 2A4 was a product of Germany, a nation with an unparalleled culture of mechanical engineering. It was a machine that cost several times more than its Polish counterpart. To compare them, they argued, was fundamentally incorrect. The PT-91, they insisted, was conceived as a budget solution, a pragmatic choice for a nation without bottomless coffers. The arguments were logical, even reasonable, but they no longer held sway with the military. The verdict had been delivered not in a boardroom, but in the field. The consequences of the trials were swift and decisive. Units previously equipped with the Twardy began the slow, laborious process of rearming, their Polish-made tanks replaced by the battle-proven German Leopards. Production of the PT-91, already paused, was not resumed. The assembly lines fell silent. Instead, the engineers received a new mandate, not to build more, but to fix what they had. They were tasked with developing a deep modernization program for the existing fleet, a desperate attempt to salvage the program and elevate the tank's reliability and combat value. But at the Military Institute of Armament Technology, the engineers were not prepared to surrender. The failure in the comparative trials was a painful blow to the reputation of Polish armor design, but they believed the situation was not beyond repair. The core of the problem, the very heart of the machine, was the S-12U engine. It was a power plant that simply could not cope with the tank's ever-increasing mass, constantly straining, overheating, and breaking down. The solution was self-evident. They needed a more powerful and far more dependable motor. Work began in the mid-2000s. The new engine, designated the S-1000, was fitted with an exhaust gas turbocharger, a modification that allowed engineers to wring a full 1,000 horsepower from the unit. This increase of 150 horsepower over the previous version was projected to dramatically improve the tank's dynamic characteristics. With this new heart, the Twardy could accelerate faster, climb gradients with more confidence, and, critically, place less wear on its long-suffering transmission. In parallel, engineers tackled the other problem areas. The electrical system was partially redesigned, its unreliable components stripped out and replaced with higher-quality substitutes. The driver's archaic night sight gave way to a modern passive device, the radomka, which offered vastly superior vision in the dark. The Drawa fire control system was also subjected to a thorough revision, with many of its known deficiencies finally addressed. These upgraded tanks, now designated the PT-91 began to trickle into the Army, replacing the earliest production models. Yet the scale of the renewal remained modest. The Polish military budget was finite, and priority was now firmly given to the acquisition of Western technology. The Leopard 2A4, and later the more advanced 2A5, were becoming the new backbone of Poland's armored fist, pushing the domestic machines into a secondary role. Then, from an unexpected quarter, a chance for redemption emerged. On the international arms market, the nation of Malaysia was searching for an affordable main battle tank. For the beleaguered PT-91, a design born of compromise and now overshadowed at home, it was a final opportunity to prove its worth. It was a chance to demonstrate that in the complex calculus of national defense, value is not always measured in raw power, but in the delicate balance of capability and cost. In the shifting geopolitical landscape of the post-Soviet world, nations once bound by the Warsaw Pact sought new identities, new alliances, and new tools of self-determination. For Poland, this meant looking inward, harnessing its industrial might to forge a symbol of sovereign strength. The result was the PT-91 Twardy, the hard or resilient tank, a machine born from a Soviet legacy but brimming with Polish ambition. While its destiny at home was uncertain, its first test would come from an unexpected quarter. Thousands of miles away, the Malaysian army, seeking to modernize its armored core, cast its gaze toward Europe. The options were stark. On one hand, the cutting-edge and ruinously expensive main battle tanks of the West. On the other, a Polish proposition. The PT-91 was significantly cheaper, yet on paper, its specifications looked remarkably competitive. After a long and arduous negotiation process, a contract was signed. It was a landmark moment. For the Bumar-Lebendi factory, this was more than just a sale. It was validation. It was the first major export order for a Polish-designed tank, a clear signal that the nation's defense industry could compete on the world stage, even if it was in the fiercely contested budget sector. The Malaysian military received vehicles tailored for a world away from the Polish plains. A special, tropical configuration, meticulously adapted to the relentless heat and crushing humidity of Southeast Asia. But this initial triumph would prove to be a solitary one. Discussions were held with several other nations. Whispers of future contracts filled the air, but no other major deals ever materialized. The Twardy's moment in the international sun was brief. Back in its homeland, the tank's fate was unfolding in a far less optimistic light. By the late 2000s, a sobering reality had set in. The Twardy, for all its upgrades, could not truly stand against the premier armor of the West. The Arawa reactive armor, a source of immense pride for its designers, was tested against the brutal physics of modern anti-tank weaponry. It was found wanting. It simply could not withstand the kinetic energy of a 120mm shell fired from a Western tank gun at a range of 2,000 meters. Any Leopard, any Abrams, could identify and destroy the Polish tank long before the Twardy could close the distance to land an effective shot of its own. The Polish military leadership, facing this grim calculus, made the difficult but necessary decision. The PT-91 would be gradually withdrawn from the front lines. The machines were transferred to training battalions and territorial defense units, where the operational demands were not nearly so high. Poland's elite armored brigades turned instead to German Leopards and looked ahead to the eventual acquisition of even more advanced platforms. The dream of a homegrown primary tank was quietly being set aside. The 233 Twardy tanks, built over a 7-year production run, were scattered across the country. Some continued their service in active units, albeit in secondary roles. Others were consigned to the silent ranks of long-term storage facilities. A few, hopelessly obsolete and worn by years of training, were deemed fit only for spare parts. What began as a grand project to provide Poland with a modern tank of its own design had, in effect, failed. Officially, the operational life of the PT-91 Twardy is scheduled to continue until the year 2030. By then, the tanks will be 35 years old, true anachronisms on a battlefield, transformed by technology they cannot counter. The Polish army had long since made its choice, placing its faith in imported steel. First German Leopards, then American Abrams, and more recently, South Korean K-2 Black Panthers. The nation's indigenous tank-building capacity, once a source of such hope, never truly recovered from the Twardy's shortcomings. The story of this tank serves as a powerful, cautionary tale of how soaring ambition can be shattered against the unforgiving wall of reality. Polish engineers sincerely believed they could transform the aging Soviet T-72 into a world-class fighting machine. They invested years of labor, millions of zloty, and all of their considerable talent into the project. But the technological gap was simply too vast, the available resources too limited. In the end, the Army received a tank that was reportedly plagued by reliability issues and fundamentally outmatched by the very threats it was designed to face. It stands as a monument not to failure, but to the harsh truth that in the crucible of war, good intentions and national pride are no substitute for a decisive technological edge. They are born of steel and fire, these titans of the battlefield. Each one a testament to the brutal calculus of war, where innovation is measured in millimeters of armor and the velocity of a shell. But inside the cold, cramped hull, there was always the human element. Young men, breathing in the fumes of oil and cordite, their world reduced to a narrow slit of glass. Generations of these machines have rolled across continents, reshaping borders and ideologies with the sheer force of their presence. And now, many sit silent in museums, their guns forever cold. They are monuments, not merely to victory or defeat, but to a relentless human drive. A drive to build, to conquer, and, perhaps, one day, to understand the true cost of our own creations.